Ladies and gentlemen, for our next panel on the challenges and opportunities in electrification, please welcome our moderator, Mr. John Bozzella, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Alliance of Automotive Innovation.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Good to see you, and great to be here. We have an outstanding panel this afternoon for you to talk about what electrification looks like over the coming decade, both the challenges as well as the opportunities facing not only auto manufacturers, but the entire value chain, the supply chain, where the opportunities for further collaboration are. So I'm really super excited about this. These are a lot of total pros coming on stage, so let me bring them out, and then we'll get right into it. I want to first introduce Isaac Chan, partner at Roland Berger. Spencer Reeder from Audi of America. And Spencer is Government Affairs and Sustainability Director there. We have Jonathan Levy of EVgo, Chief Commercial Officer. And also Rachel McCleery, Director of Manufacturing Policy at Ford Motor Company. Thank you. Thanks all for being here. You know, I want to set the stage, and, you know, this might be secondhand for people here in the room, but let's kind of review the bidding on what the market looks like today and start there. I had a boss, a CEO at a company, one of which is represented on this stage, who used to say, let's start from the customer and work back. So we're going to do that. So here's what I see in the marketplace today. So Q4 of 2022, 283,000 electrified vehicles were sold in the US market. That's about 8.5% of light-duty vehicle sales. And by the way, when I say electrified vehicles or EVs, I'm really talking about three categories here. We're talking about battery electric vehicles, we're talking about plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and we're talking about hydrogen fuel cell electrified vehicles. So those numbers include all three categories. If you look at the entire year, 2022, 935,000 vehicles, electrified vehicles, were sold in the US. That's 7% of light-duty vehicle sales for 2022. In 2020, that number was roughly 2.5%. So you can say, hey, look, there's some positive momentum here. But when you start to peel the layers back a little bit and look behind that, you can see the market might not be quite as evenly distributed across the United States as it is. Charging infrastructure might be not quite as available in certain places as it is in certain other places. And so as we start to think about not only where the market is today, but where we're going over the next decade, 50% perhaps by 2030, and maybe toward 100% by 2035 or around that time, what do we really need to be working on to be able to get to those levels? And so I want to jump right into it and first get our panelists' reaction to, you know, again, what the market looks like today. And I want to start with the automakers because they're selling cars as we speak. So Rachel, let me start with you. You know, what's your sense about where the market is today?
Sure, thanks John, and thanks all for joining today. At Ford, a lot of what John echoed is, you know, we're seeing on our end, our EV sales doubled in 2022. We have over 61,000 EVs on the road as of the end of last year. But we also have made massive commitments to drastically increase that run rate. While we haven't given any US specifics, we do have global goals of wanting to produce 2 million EVs annually by the end of 2026. If you look where we're at in this calendar year, that's not that far. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we have a lot to manage within our own supply chain system in order to meet a lot of those goals. But what we see is demand. We see a desire for more connected, more electrified vehicles. We see customers wanting more. I mean, as many of you know, the F-150 Lightning is impossible to get. For those of you who have looked it up, we haven't opened our reservation banks in a very long time. So we see the desire, we see the customers saying we want these vehicles, so we're going to do everything we can to give them those products.
Thank you. Spencer, what's your perspective on the market?
Yeah, I think it's really robust. It's nice to be here as well. Thanks for inviting me and Audi to participate. Listen, we have 5 all-electric models in the market, more than any other automaker. And I always have to remind people that Audi does have more models than anybody in the market. We, like Ford, can't keep enough of them in stock, certainly during the pandemic, and that's attributable to a whole host of factors that I think we're all familiar with, supply chain. But this huge demand in certain pockets of the market, right? And this is the thing I'd emphasize, and John, you alluded to this. There are parts of the country where the demand is incredibly high. We had 3 dealerships, Audi dealerships in California, during the height of the pandemic that sold more all-electric vehicles than our internal combustion engine product, which had never happened before in an Audi dealership. So again, this was in California where there's a lot of programs in place, a lot of awareness, lots of investment in infrastructure, which I know Jonathan will talk about. So I think as we think about the health of the market and both on the demand side and the supply side, you can't look at it sort of similarly across the whole country. And so I think that's going to be an important dimension to the conversation.
Fantastic. Before I get to Isaac, you heard that the automakers made selfless pitches for their products, which we allow here, right? That's okay, yeah? All right, I'm going to make one for my own product. The numbers that I just mentioned and the numbers that you're hearing on the stage, if you really want to dig into what the market looks like, you can get a publication from us called Get Connected. And you can go to autosinnovate.org/getconnected and see on a quarterly basis exactly what the market looks like from a vehicle sales perspective, from a production perspective, from an infrastructure perspective. So that's my shameless pitch to go after Ford and Audi. So Isaac, your perspective on where we are with regard to the market today.
Yeah, now I wish I had prepared my own shameless pitch as well. No, I think when
shameless?
There's no shame. I think it's important to remember that on the path to get to that 50% target or even mass adoption beyond that, there's still a long way to go. We heard yesterday many different talks from many different perspectives about the challenges in the supply chain, lack of critical minerals, the need to accelerate development of resources, invest in our, say, industrial base for the new economy. And ultimately, that's going to pose one series of challenges. That's going to be a bottleneck in the future. Even with the best projections of all the developments that are planned, in the best case scenario, the supply-demand balance for nickel and lithium remains very tight through the next decade. The second big challenge that I see is consumer acceptance. And I think it's a great path that we're on. We've gained a lot of awareness. We run a survey every 6 months of consumers, a cross-section of consumers in over 20 different countries. And what you found is that over the past few years in the US, the percentage of consumers who are willing to consider, or who were considering a battery electric vehicle, jumped from about 20% pre-pandemic, suddenly over the course of 2020 and 2021, up to about 40%. But then it's actually about leveled off. And getting us beyond that point and getting people beyond the point of just considering and actually converting to a purchase is going to require addressing a lot of the pain points in the consumer journey. In a lot of ways, electric vehicles provide better driving experience, better riding experience perhaps. It's going to showcase a lot of the new technology that we see from the automakers in a fantastic way, I have to say. On the other hand, there's downsides to that. We heard from Vic earlier today from BP Pulse about his own personal experience with that. And it takes one thing to convince early adopters. It takes another thing to convince my 75-year-old mother that she should buy an electric vehicle and deal with all those hassles along the way. The third issue, and then I'll stop, I promise. Third issue is just the profitability and the economics of selling EVs. A lot of the automakers are currently losing money on their electric vehicles. You could say that they don't necessarily have the strongest incentive to try to produce more, install more, but they are all actively working to do that, and very earnestly. However, the economics are going to become increasingly challenging until they get over these certain hurdles, until material prices fall, until technologies get better and can provide a seamless user experience without costing as much as EVs do today.
So Isaac, that's perfect because you've set up the transition into the meat of this conversation, which is what are some of the challenges and how do we address them? But one of the challenges you left for Jonathan, of course, is the availability, the ubiquity, the usability of charging infrastructure, right? And so, Jonathan, to finish up where we started, what's your sense of the market today and how infrastructure relates to the market? And then maybe we can start to unpack the question about, what does charging look like and what does it need to look like?
Yeah, so there's a lot
beyond
baked in
early
there.
adopters. Yeah.
Right, so let's start from where you started, John, right? Which is let's start with the end user. The driver is the most important part of this equation. One of the things that's changed a lot is we've laid waste to the myth that people don't want EVs. That was the thesis for years, is these are compliance cars. And now the wait lists that our colleagues have referred to are more than sufficient evidence to see that there is plenty of pent-up demand. As far as the consumer journey, I think actually the sites that you both were sharing are really relevant in that the number one indicator of if you're willing to consider buying an electric vehicle is if you know someone who already has an electric vehicle, which then ties back to Spencer's point of that's going to be uneven right now because there's a density of sales in California, the ZEV states, and what we've been all referring to as the Smile states, as some of the automakers have been moving much more aggressively into Texas and Florida as EVs have been huge hits in those markets. If you look at why customers don't convert, the top 3 reasons are cost, concerns about range, and access to charging. All of those will not only change, but have a strong interplay with education. A great deal of customers will say, there's no charging near me, at which point we say, pull out PlugShare, and full disclosure, EVgo owns PlugShare. And we say, take a look, there's probably more charging than you think. EVgo has more than 850 locations, more than 2,500 fast chargers, more than 4,000 fast charging stalls in our active engineering and construction pipeline. There is active build out. But if you are in a part of the country that doesn't have it, that doesn't matter to you as much as the part of the country that does. It's very much that use case of one that's being extrapolated from, and we have to overcome some of these education barriers. But the reality of the automakers investing a collective $1.3 trillion means that this is real, this is happening, it's happening now. How much more quickly will it happen is the key question for all of us to answer.
Yeah, so I want to get into that. How can we accelerate this, right? And I also want to come back to these challenges: affordability, access, awareness, charging, supply chain. But let's sort of look at this from a macro perspective right now. So we've got early adopters. We've got what I would call easy adopters, right? Maybe a few folks in this room. It's my second car. I've got a garage. I can get the panel on the wall. It's pretty easy. But beyond that, it gets challenging. We have a number of things happening beyond industry investment and industry leadership that I think a lot of folks here in the room who are part of this discussion are trying to understand, right? Sort of what is the role of regulation? What is the role of policy like the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and frankly, CHIPS and science for that matter? And what role do they play in moving this acceleration forward, right? We're transforming the automotive industrial base as well as the automotive market. So how do we think about those tools, and how are companies thinking specifically about it? And so maybe I'll start with you, Rachel.
Sure. You mentioned this, John, and so did Isaac, this industrial policy, what that means. And I think to take things at even a higher level, more macro level, what the IRA did, what the CHIPS bill did, and of course what the infrastructure law has done, these are wonderful things for the industry. But there's still 3 separate policies that require 3 separate levels of implementation. And what we really need is industrial policy, focused, sustained, decadal policy that provides certainty. So while we are absolutely making business decisions based on these fantastic new laws that we believe are going to help ensure more consumer adoption, certainly help companies like Ford meet these goals. We do need certainty. And at the end of the day, the IRA is a 10-year bill. And we look at our decision making and our business decisions through lenses that go much further than that. And we look at what China has done, right, with decades of just sustained investment. That is what has allowed that market to move forward and get ahead in ways that we're still kind of playing catch up to. So while our company is certainly looking at implementation with these 3 laws as being important to kind of those near-term steps, what happens after that 10-year window? What happens if there's a change in administration or a change in Congress and those laws might get pulled back, or we might not have as many resources available? All of those things are part of our own calculation. So I think there are 2 ways to think about these goals in both that short-term lane and that longer-term lane.
Mm-hmm. So Spencer, lots of tools in the toolbox. If I could sort of, at a very high level, describe, especially with regard to the IRA, what's happening here, right? There are a number of things. One is increase awareness and opportunities for purchasers of EVs, but also supply chain focus, right? That's a big topic of conversation here in this room and in the halls around this room and at the dinner the other night, right? So how do we do this, right? How does the United States do it? Does it partner with other allied nations and trading partners? What's your perspective about those tools in the toolbox and how they need to play out?
Yeah, listen, I think first, probably most important thing to say is that Audi, from a global perspective even, really supports the ambition behind the Inflation Reduction Act and these suite of policies that are really trying to tackle climate change in a fundamental way, in a systemic way. That's fundamental to what we're doing as a company. We were one of the first automakers to publicly support the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. What we're doing as a company, I just have to underscore this, is really connecting back to this climate crisis. So the fact that we launch our last internal combustion engine vehicle, a new launch, in about 2 years from now, that's it. 100-year-old automotive company, Audi, is launching its last ICE vehicle in about 2 years. So that's pretty remarkable. So we're all in on this. We're totally committed to it. Back to your point, our concern has been the mapping of industrial policy, I think like Rachel was talking about, onto the consumer space. We stood by the Biden administration when the president wanted to make this 50% announcement by 2030. We're all in. Our business plan is completely aligned with that. And we were asked to do that by the White House, just to be very transparent about this. We were happy to do it. We stood by California when they were attacked by the last administration. We were one of the few automakers that stood by California when they said, listen, we don't want to pare back our ambition. So Audi's been very unambiguous. When the IRA came out, it was mapping industrial policy into the consumer space and penalizing us, frankly, right, initially. Now you see a lot of recovery, the announcement with Japan. We know that talks are involved with the Europeans. Our lunchtime talk was tapping into this sense of we have, as allies, we have to work together. This climate crisis is not going to be solved. The transformation of the transportation industry is not going to be solved nation by nation. So again, the inspiration behind IRA, fantastic. The implementation and the projection on the consumer space, not great, honestly. The complication around the consumer purchase incentive, not great. Confusing for everybody. So that aside, I guess that would be one commentary on it. I think the opportunity now to build in durability, long-term, I think, assurances over just not the next 5 or 10 years, but throughout, is an integrative policy analysis that looks at federal, state, and local government really importantly. And I know you deal with that every day at the local government level, but there really has to be additional ties that flow policies down all the way to the local level and to get into the mass market and be successful, I think.
Yeah, it's really very interesting perspective, right? Because what policymakers are trying to do is balance a number of different objectives, right? Drive consumer awareness, address affordability at a point in the marketplace where vehicles are, the average transaction price of an EV is maybe over $60,000 still today as we speak. But at the same time, address things like supply chain and how do we address competitive issues vis-a-vis China, for example. So Isaac, your sense about this balance that policymakers are trying to strike between, awareness in the marketplace and addressing, competitive geopolitics and competition.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that was said, and build on top of that and pull on a thread that you mentioned, which is, we operate in a global context. It's a global industry. It's dominated by multinational companies, and the U.S. is not self-sufficient. Even if we partner very strongly with very close allies, the U.S. is not self-sufficient with that close cluster. And so, as we consider industrial policy as a country, I think it's important to remember that while the U.S.-China decoupling is a pivot point for geopolitical tension right now, it's not just a black and white model of the world. And there are a lot of major economies, major automotive markets, which can't as easily choose a side. And so by forcing a lot of countries and markets, which are home to other large automakers that have presence in the US and other places, we're creating a schism that's not necessarily going to be good for environmental progress or electrification progress. So I think that's one of the dynamics that's important to remember. It's less about us versus them and choosing sides. It's more about finding a path to progress as humanity in the world, ideally.
So Jonathan, I want to get you in here, and I'm going to add another layer of complexity to the conversation, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, IIJA, for those of you who are deep into Washington jargon, acronyms, and initials. So one of the many things in that infrastructure bill was a fairly significant down payment on public charging, fast charging here in the United States. I think $7.5 billion all told if you look at the Levy program, for example, and you look at some of the competitive grant programs that can flow out of the Joint Programs Office between the Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy. I have a couple questions for you, about that. You've got 50 states with 50 plans. How's that going to work?
Yeah, well, look, I think, as John Podesta said yesterday, in the tax credit land in IRA, it used to be year-end retroactive extenders. That was horrible. Getting 10 years for 30C, huge improvement, so we'll start with progress and be good there. On Levy, though, your point is exactly spot on. It's even more complicated, right? So let's just focus on the $5 billion formula funds. They are then allocated to each state, and they are allocated on a year-by-year basis, where states have to build out the corridors, build out, not defined, and then can do other projects. So actually, you'll end up having something like 50 to 200 different programs that have to be approved. The plans have to be approved by the White House, by the DOT FHWA. And then we have to figure out how to navigate those. The 2.5 in discretionary, the private sector can't be the recipient of those federal funds. And then that process is finally underway. But it's a big challenge because we hear about how important these funds are to the market. They are. Federal policy and federal funding as a tailwind is massively important. But none of that money has gotten to the private sector yet. We all thought it would be in the market and in the ecosystem by now, but the federal minimum standards were only recently approved. The Buy America regs were only recently finalized last month. And frankly, that's one of the big challenges. We need a glide path when we're starting basically from scratch on a domestic manufacturing capacity, and we don't have one. And that is going to put some challenges in place where there are some projects that we think could go live in 2023 or early 2024 that may or may not be able to. And so I think that reality is something that we've been trying to work with the administration on. They're very receptive to input, but that's one of those competing priorities. Are we deploying now, or are we building the capacity? Are we doing both? Which one's more important? Which one has to go first? We have a multi-decadal opportunity here, but with $5 billion at the fore now, everybody is very focused on that. It's not the last bite at the apple. We have to make sure it's sustaining and building and leveraging private capital for years to come. The line that we use at EVgo is that we are building a business that is sustainable both financially and environmentally. It's to no benefit to either Ford or Audi if all the charging companies can't actually make this work. They need us around for years to come, and so we need to make sure that we're building now and building in a way that's sustainable and we can keep building for years.
Yeah, you mentioned manufacturing. You're talking about the manufacturing of the charging equipment and technology, not just the manufacturing of the vehicles.
Oh,
right?
100%.
So
right.
let's just focus on that for a second. I mean, that could hold us back is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, EVgo is not a manufacturer. We work with a number of suppliers in part so that we can have some redundancy and resiliency in the supply chain, but also so we can be technology specifiers. And we've been working with partners around the globe, including at allies in South Korea and in Taiwan, and that is not eligible. And so we've been working with those suppliers. They're all onshoring, but it takes time, especially for 350 kilowatt chargers, to be able to bring those on board and go with it. And that is the ability of that to turn on quickly. It's not immediate, and there's testing. We have an EVgo Innovation Lab in El Segundo because UL certification is necessary but not sufficient. We do not have test standards yet for drop, for ingress for water, all these things that we've had to do on our own and propagate out to the industry. If we are looking to maximize reliability, which again, go to the driver, that is the most important thing, is charging available, reliable, dependable, convenient. Those are the most important things right now. If we concentrate in only a handful of manufacturers, then as soon as there's one problem, are there going to be parts for repairs? Is there going to be a recall? All of this is part of why we think a glide path would have been a much better idea, and that we continue to engage to see if there are ways that we can affect change here.
You know, I want to stick with charging a little bit more. I mean, there are a couple of questions here that your answer prompted for me. One, you're talking about fast charging. I mean, there's an enormous amount of power required to be delivered to the point of these charging stations, right? Mm-hmm. And so behind your business, there has to be a grid that can serve you, right? How do you feel about where we are there right now? Is grid resiliency a concern? Do other folks, whether automakers or, Isaac, from your perspective, is that, how far back, in the journey of the electron are we concerned?
Yeah, utilities are a critical partner. We're a commercial customer owning the meter that's paying the utility, but additionally, the design approvals are there. They're often supplying the transformer. In some cases, they're funding make-ready or rebating equipment. So they're really critical to the timelines as well as supplying the power itself. The California Air Resources Board put out a study that said even if you took all of the EVs currently in California, they account for less than 1% of the power demand in California. And when you get to the 5 million EV case, they account for, I think it was like 7%, but again, less than 5% of the peak power demand. So I'm not concerned about the power availability and the grid's resilience in that regard, but it comes back again to Spencer's point of distributional. What do we have where? Which markets are hard to work in? Mm-hmm. We launched a program we call Connect the Watts to bring together the stakeholders in the EV ecosystem and say, how can we do this more quickly? Which utilities have best practices that we can propagate? It's very similar to Sunshot during the Obama administration of you get to $1 a watt on solar, not just through technical innovations, but by reducing soft costs, standardizing contracts. There is a lot of wasted time, energy, and money in the permitting processes, the approval processes, other processes where constructing a charging site, actually constructing, takes 6 weeks or so. The whole process takes 12 to 18 months, and we need to shrink that.
Right.
Yeah, I would just say there's two things I would highlight, at least from Audi's perspective. I mentioned climate change, the acceleration, the continued path towards decarbonization of the energy grid is critical. We need to be able to tell our customers as they drive the EV that it actually is realizing the promise of the full promise of driving electric, which is really a climate benefit. It's a better car, we would argue as well, but there's this great story around the climate benefits. That is only realized if the policy landscape helps the energy markets decarbonize quickly. So there's a bunch of detailed work there. We as automakers are actually involved in that conversation. We think it's actually important to have our view. Reliability is fundamental. That's always presumed, right? But if you get a text message on your phone that says you can't charge for the next 2 hours because there's some energy issue, that's a problem, right? So, and that was obviously exploited in the media and I think overblown. So that's key. The other thing I would just put out there, high level concept. If filling your electric vehicle, filling the tank, ever exceeds in cost to that of what you would pay to fill a comparable internal combustion engine vehicle, we lose the mass market. I mean, this is just a high level concept that I think we tend to forget. His cost of business can't be such that when you pull in your electric vehicle, it's more expensive to charge your vehicle than it would be to fill it with gas or diesel. We lose. The customer, the mass market cares about economics. That's going to be the driver for this. And whatever we do around vehicle to grid, demand charges at the utility level, all the detailed conversations we have around the utility business model, how we socialize those costs. Is it not just in the rate base? So lots of issues that get into there. But I would just say, like, always remember, the cost to fill electric vehicles got to be on par or below.
Yeah. So, but that raises a question. Is there a viable business case for public charging, right? And I mean, you know, maybe I should probably start with you, Jonathan, but I want Isaac to jump in here and Rachel as well. I mean, you know.
Can I just say yes and we'll move on? No. Yes. Look, we have been building this company for a long time with a focus on unit economics. It may be something that makes us a little bit different than other charging companies that are out there, but we do believe that it's important that you can be sustainable, again, and that requires making sure that your incentives are aligned. I mean, by owning and operating charging, we make money when the customers use it. Same incentive the customer has. If they pull up and it's a broken charger, they're very unhappy, as are we for missing a revenue opportunity. But partnerships are really critical. It's not just an infrastructure business. It's an infrastructure business that layers on software solutions, other services, partnerships with automakers that are really key to delivering that product that is profitable and that will be there to be able to then generate. You know, one of my former colleagues used to say that it's very similar to the telecommunications industry. You put a lot of money into the ground for 3G, and then you generate revenue off of it to be able to put a lot of money in the ground for 4G, so on and so forth. It is capital intensive, and that's partially why federal funds and other public partners are really critical to make sure that we can pull forward when there's a break even for a lot of these stations. But once we put them in the ground, we can generate revenue off of them for years to come and invest and create this virtuous cycle. I get often asked, as everybody here does, about the chicken and the egg, and we don't like that one. And Spencer's heard me say this, but we think it's peanut butter and jelly, because you need both. We're not starting from scratch, and you need to have both the base of infrastructure to be used by the cars that will then justify more infrastructure and so on and so forth. There is a risk of a glut with some of the way that the Levy funds will go, but similarly, there's a risk of a bunch of people applying for funds and never building those projects, depending on the program design. So those best practices are really relevant so that we build an ecosystem where federal funds are accelerating and advancing the whole market, not just necessarily reaching for the stars and missing.
Yeah, I think to help kind of resolve those two views as well, it's important to recognize that the unit economics of public charging is only one piece of the puzzle. Public charging is one aspect of charging, and you have to take all the different aspects of charging, the different use cases available, and then mesh those onto the consumer experience. And so I agree, from a consumer perspective, the overall charging experience has to be cheaper on a per use basis, right? The marginal cost per mile of an electric vehicle, the value proposition has to be there. On the other hand, with public charging, that's only one aspect, right? If you're talking about DC fast charging on the side of the highway for that couple trips a year when you're doing the road trip with the family, well, does that have to actually be cheaper on a per unit basis? Not necessarily, because that's just one aspect. It's a special use case. It avoids having to rent the car or do something else or really inconvenience yourself. So people are willing to pay for convenience. I think it's important to remember that. And that's not the only, public charging is not the only way that people should be charging their car, ideally in the future.
Yeah, just a quick response before Rachel. I live in the garage typically, but when we talk about mass adoption, there are going to be plenty of people that want to drive an EV that don't have access to that only have access to the public charger. Now, maybe it doesn't need to be a 350 kilowatt charger, but those are going to be where the investment's made. And I think that it would be unwise for us to assume that, yes, that's a convenience and someone can pay twice as much for that convenience. Some people don't have time. They need to charge quickly, and that's the only way that they're going to make an EV work. So I think we have to internalize that debate in a way if we think about 100%, right? If our goal is 20% adoption of EVs, I agree. But if our goal is 100%, exactly, we can't.
Well, exactly. But then you have to change the paradigm of how you think about public charging. And there's the on-road fast charging along the corridors. Right. There's the in-garage charging. But then if you really want to get to mass adoption and you want to address people who don't have a garage or who are renting or under whatever circumstance or park on the street, well, then you might have to view charging as a utility in a way. Yeah. Right? And so there's going to be different roles for different business models.
I think that's a little overblown.
I'm sorry to throw
No, I just think it's, and I know, Rachel, we need to pull you in too. I think that's a little overblown, right? Because if you think about it, you often hear this argument of nobody's building in disproportionately impacted communities and in dense urban environments. Incorrect, for the exact reason that you just said. There are a lot of people, including rideshare drivers, EVgo has long partnerships with Uber and Lyft, that need access to a lot of reliable and convenient fast charging, and they happen to be often in those dense urban environments that can be disproportionately impacted communities. There are other policy levers to pull in the less easy way to do it in rural communities and elsewhere, as well as partnerships, right? Partnerships with automakers, partnerships with nonprofits even. We work with Grid Alternatives and Clean Cars for All in California to make sure that lower income Californians can have access to discounted or free charging. There are all sorts of levers for this that aren't necessarily the kind of one size fits all of, oh, we'll hand it to the utility, where in some cases the utility is a critical complement to the rest of the market, but it is a balance, and we do need this market to be able to sustain. Going back to your point, the cost basis needs to be rational. There are some markets where our effective price per kilowatt hour is north of $1. We cannot pass that along, but similarly, the utility should recognize the beneficial load that they're getting from this change, and that needs to be incorporated into the internalities of the system.
Right. So, Rachel, I want you to talk now not only about the peanut butter, but also about the jelly, right? So, because so your perspective on charging, but I also want to bring you in on the start of a conversation about vehicle affordability as well, right? So if it is peanut butter and jelly, we got to talk about both. So,
yeah, and I think maybe, John, if I may too, talk about what we're seeing further up the stream. We can't, if a company like Ford can't create and build innovative EVs with the supply chain needed to build those batteries and have those vehicles perform, then the charging conversation completely goes away. Right? I mean, there are two tracks here, and automakers need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to secure the raw materials needed to have those vehicles that customers want to buy. And then we have the charging pieces that have been discussed. If we can't secure those materials, if we can't figure out how to refine the technology for the next version, for the next F-150 Lightning, for the next Mach-E, then we lose the game, right? We lose that dominance. So, I think the vehicle affordability piece comes into play because we need to make sourcing decisions and chemistry decisions that are low cost, that will allow us to have the best technology out there, but will also keep costs low. Model E, which is Ford's electric vehicle arm, is essentially a startup. Isaac talked about incurring costs in order to innovate. Certainly we are seeing that at Ford. We're willing to take that on for the gains that we see. But other automakers are approaching this in the exact same way. It's a startup business, so you're going to have loss in the front end. So if we figure out a way to get these materials with our allied partners, within our own country's borders, if we find a way to be smart about where we're sourcing and doing it in a way that will create low cost but innovative options, then I think we find that sweet spot in that middle market. We have the vehicles that we can continue to produce, the demand that we're already behind at meeting, but then surpass that. And so both of these two pieces, the securing of the materials to create those batteries and the charging infrastructure that's needed to support, they have to happen simultaneously. And there are similar but also different barriers to each of these.
Yeah. So, but on the question of vehicle affordability, what I hear you saying is key to that is going to be the availability and price of raw materials.
Yes.
Right? Including
Absolutely.
critical minerals. And so the agreements that Spencer was referring to are important, but so are the ability to develop partnerships and engagements here in the United States. So tell me a little bit more about how Ford is thinking about that. So partnerships are important. Owning the opportunity to drive technology into the United States is important. I heard you say it's important for Ford's future. Would you agree it's important for our economic future as a country? And how do you think about that also from a workforce perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a national security issue. We are looking at, whoever will figure out how to dominate the next LFP is going to be able to dominate the energy market for electric vehicles. So automakers like Ford, Audi, and others are racing to figure out what that's going to be, while also trying to meet existing demand with existing technology, which we don't have the expertise in. So again, it's this two-track issue. So for us, we try to think of ways to collaborate with partners to make smart decisions where we can eventually start doing all of this ourselves. Ford has a great R&D center in Romulus, Michigan, where we have people hard at work figuring out what that next technology is going to be. And we're also figuring out, actively right now, who we want to partner with. And again, I think that sweet spot is finding the technology that is ripe for innovation, that will increase the range on a vehicle, that will be fun to drive, that will be safe, right? All of those aspects people care about when they buy any type of vehicle. but we also need to keep costs down too. So we're talking to partners, we're figuring out the markets, how they're moving, and what makes the best sense for our own footprint. But ultimately, Ford produces more vehicles in the US than any other automaker, and our supply chain's heavily rooted in the US and North America. So if we can't do that with our EV elements, then we're also going to incur more costs when it comes to shipping and moving of these materials. The more you localize, the more efficient and affordable the whole process is, and that eventually moves down to the customer.
Right, and Isaac, this gets back to something you were saying earlier, which is, the auto manufacturers are making massive bets, right? Massive investments on this shift. They're not money-making bets right now. Is that one of the reasons why we're seeing the development of strategic partnerships and engagements, say, between battery companies and OEMs? What's your sense of how we break through this barrier and really address affordability and availability of raw materials?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the reason for the partnerships is that everyone realizes that they need to defray the cost of the investment. They can't do it alone, and they shouldn't do it alone. There's an economic reason why Tier 1 suppliers is a part of the value chain, because you can pull a lot of scale and get a lot of economies and efficiency out of that. But I think on the path to affordability, the IRA and other subsidies do help a lot. Is it a perfect long-term solution? No. I mean, if we hit the White House's target, and we're still paying the full subsidy on everything, and everyone's really getting the most out of it, you're talking about paying over $100 billion per year at that point. But on the other hand, we've seen that Tesla can make money. Now, is that replicable across the industry longer term? I think it still remains to be seen. I think we'll see more competition, and that those kinds of returns will come down. But I think on the other hand, we're going to see the other automakers climb up that path, get into greater economies of scale. I think right now, many of the success stories that we see from many of the traditional automakers in the EV space is annual volumes of 40,000, 50,000 units a year. That's a great victory, while Tesla right now is producing 300,000 units a year per model. So I think when you get to those levels and economies of scale across platforms, we'll see the economics change. And I think that ultimately the industry will converge to something that's long-term sustainable. Otherwise, the capital will flow out. Yeah.
Right. Spencer, let me get you back in here. Big bets. Affordability continues to be a challenge right now, but I think for reasons that we've all discussed. I mean, Rachel made a good point about it. And by the way, Isaac's point's a good one too. I mean, if you look at share of the market right now, the premium segment of the EV market is driving that affordability question to some degree, which is a wonderful thing, right, Spencer? It's a wonderful thing because you got 5 Audis out there. But how do you think about, sort of again, the shift and how we can accelerate that shift and make sure that it's a good business for Audi?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we have a little bit of an advantage because of the segment of the market we operate in. So we're in the premium segment. If you go into an Audi dealer today and you look at the price of our all-electric vehicle and its internal combustion engine counterpart, it's very comparably priced. There isn't actually a huge difference because we can actually accommodate that within our price structure. This is also the fruits of early decisions back in 2016 that Audi made. I think ahead of some of our competition, we converted a plant in Brussels, completely gutted it and turned it into an all-electric manufacturing plant back in 2016, 2017. So by 2018, we were producing the e-tron, which was our first vehicle that we launched in the US. So I think we made the bet early enough that we could do some systemic things across our company where I think the economics for us are actually pretty good. But I think it's going to be different for every company, and there's a life cycle to that, right, that I think Isaac was talking about. Yeah. In our view, in terms of the health of the overall industry here in the US, people buy cars from, as you know, lots of different brands. And so I think our pitch to the folks in this room are, on the consumer side, really think about creating a landscape that attracts every car buyer in the US that's going to want to consider an EV. And the policy should map onto that consumer side, the demand side of the equation, in a way where everyone who's going out to buy a new car, regardless of the brand, is able to consider an electric vehicle. If you're segmenting the market so that only these few brands qualify for whatever it is. Now you've really you've tied a hand behind your back, right, in terms of the overall objective of hitting President Biden's goal. So that would be my sort of qualitative advice for any of the policies we're thinking about. Again, I think Audi, even though we don't have a plant in the US, the industrial policy, the manufacturing policy behind IRA is great. If we look to expand capacity, we'll be tempted now to consider that. But we're not going to shut down a plant in Germany or Belgium and put those workers out of a job and their families at risk to do that. And so I think this is why I think you have to think about it in a more global perspective, or at least within the allies, in a way that's durable, that meets the overall objective. So that would be my...
Yeah, it's great perspective. And just to put some numbers behind your point about the breadth of the market, 91 vehicle models available in the marketplace today. 47 of those are battery electric vehicles. 42 are plug-ins. 2 are fuel cells. If you look at those BEVs, of those 47, 25 are utility vehicles already, right? 17 are cars, 3 are pickups, 2 are vans. So you're already seeing some breadth in the marketplace. That should help address affordability. And I think, what I hear you saying, Spencer, is let's make sure that as we continue to implement policy, that we do it in a way that's broadly applied so that consumers across the marketplace have an opportunity to benefit. We have a few minutes left. I want to do kind of a few lightning round questions and then have you sum up with some broader perspective about the future. Let's talk quickly about fleets. What's the role of fleets in the EV transformation? We heard some of that a little bit earlier today. Fleets sound pretty important to me. Would you agree? Rachel?
Yes, so for Ford in particular, we already are a dominant player in the commercial vehicle space. So when questions about how we would attack our own EV footprint came up early on, we knew the commercial market was where we wanted to play early. We have our all-electric E-Transit, which is a cargo van. We make that in Kansas City, and we can't, again, sell enough of them. And I think our customer base is going to be the federal government. It's going to be big box companies. It's going to be a ton of different entities. And we think that if we can take what we know how to do best in the ICE space with commercial vehicles and apply it to EVs, that's going to help with profitability, and it's going to help round out our EV portfolio. So certainly for Ford Motor Company, we're making a big bet in the commercial space. We think that the demand is there on the customer side, and we have the expertise to do it. And that's why the E-Transit was one of our first EVs out the gate.
Yeah. So Jonathan, fleets is like a wonderful thing for you, right? I mean, more, fleet customers, nice throughput, right? So fleets are important, I would think, from an infrastructure and a charging business perspective as well.
Look, this goes back to Spencer's point too. They're critical from that commercial perspective as well as a climate perspective. Rideshare drivers are driving 3+ times the average mileage of the typical retail user. And those miles also tend to start and end in low to moderate income communities, so there's a public health impact there as well. On the commercial side, there's a bunch of different ways that we're looking at fleets. Sometimes access to a public charging network for that throughput is all they need. Again, the Uber and Lyft example. Sometimes they need behind-the-fence charging at their own depots, from all the way up to Class 8 trucks, something that we've been working with a number of partners. And sometimes they need dedicated away-from-base charging, or what we call hubs. Part of the problem is that right now, to Rachel's point, people can't get as many vehicles as they want. And there's a little bit of pilotitis, right? People are doing 2 or 4 vehicles at a time. And so getting the economies of scale, especially if they're doing level 2 charging, is actually quite challenging. So how do we get people to move more quickly? How do we get the vehicles to market quick enough to learn the lessons and go? Yeah. If you look at the total cost of ownership of an EV in the fleet setting, the upfront cost is almost nothing, right? What you can do to optimize and basically arbitrage your energy costs over the life, that's where the real savings opportunity is. So we've launched a software solution we call EVgo Optima to do just that. But until you have a critical mass of vehicles, the value prop's not that important for you. So we need to accelerate this market in order to have the throughput, the climate impact, and everything kind of just continue to accelerate.
Yeah. So Isaac, you want to add anything on the fleet?
Yeah, I mean, as Jonathan said, it's an important part because it represents an outsized share or disproportionate share of the emissions. But the fleet space is also very fragmented. And so the nice thing about the fleet space is that it acts very rationally, or more rationally than consumers generally. Everything gets operated on TCO. But on the other hand, you have a huge heterogeneity in the types of fleets that are out there. You have very, very large fleets which can afford to invest in learning how to electrify and learning the rules of the game and building out the internal capabilities that can help push forward electrification. On the other hand, you have very, very many small fleets that might be just a handful of vehicles, small municipalities, et cetera, and they're not going to have the scale to bother investing. And so having these kinds of solutions, as Jonathan just highlighted, that help meet them halfway and take down those frictions or barriers to adoption, I think is going to be very important.
Yeah, I want to shift quickly to dealers and then ask you a big thing question. So your choice, Spencer, do you want to answer a dealer question or do you want to answer the fleet question first?
I know this will come as a shock, but not a lot of people call Audi for fleet.
Exactly. So let's get into dealers. So
We'll take your call if you're interested.
I'm in the interest of full, participation. I figured that's where you want to go.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about dealers. Look, go to market. How do we go to market with EVs? There are really two channels, depending on what kind of company you are. You have a direct sale channel, and for others, especially folks who've been in the market for a long time, you've got a dealer network. How is it working with dealers? What are the challenges that dealers are facing selling to consumers at this stage in the market? Spencer.
Yeah, there's a lot of dimensions to this. I think, listen, we have the advantage. I don't know how many dealers Ford has. Do you know?
Not off the top of my head, but it's a lot of.
It's a lot. We have 300, so it's like a small fraction of what a company like Ford has. As I said, we have 5 models, so it's not like one EV in the corner of the showroom that maybe one of the salespeople knows about and can talk to the customer. Like, our portfolio is now being dominated by this, so all of our salespeople know about our product. I just actually helped participate in an EV deep dive training in Ontario, California for our dealers to talk about some of the policy issues. So if you're working at an Audi dealer, you know about electric vehicles, and so when someone walks in, they're going to get a very good experience. I think the challenge for the industry, though, is there's a lot of turnover in the sales staff. Mm-hmm. And so we may train someone up quite well, and we have an ongoing training program, but the new person maybe comes in and doesn't know that. I think the industry overall, the fluency throughout the sales staff will get better and better. You talked about all the models. All of the brands now are investing, so I think the entire sales force, workforce will become much more fluent.
Yeah. Rachel, your perspective on dealers and EVs.
I would love to jump in and provide kind of a bookend, just as Spencer said, a much different perspective at Ford. For us, we obviously have a dealer base that are learning new products and are learning how to sell both vehicles, some similar variants. I think the biggest challenge in the near term is going to be, just getting information to dealers on the types of tax credits their consumers can have for these vehicles. Is it going to be $3,750? Is it going to be $7,500? Is it going to be no tax credit at all? Especially as vehicles have different makes of chemistry. So at Ford, we have NCM, which is a nickel cobalt manganese variety that we source differently than what will be our LFP batteries, which will have to get minerals in a different track. So how do these dealers that will have vehicles with different batteries and different supply chains be able to explain to consumer, this is exactly how much you will get back with this tax credit? So closing the communication gap between the IRS, the OEM, and the dealer is going to be a huge challenge because, as we all talked about, affordability is the name of the game. If a customer walks into a dealer and doesn't know that they can get a $7,500 tax credit off of a vehicle, or maybe they think it's $7,500, but it turns out it's only $3,750, those are thousands of dollars. Those are decisions that are made upon purchase. So figuring out when these new regulations come out from Treasury, how we can empower our dealers to be informed, to make confident decisions about cost when they're explaining these vehicles to customers, that's going to be so important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the Treasury and the IRS ought to look at a consumer-facing portal to bring all of this information together. So there's something, in addition to what the automakers are doing and the dealers are doing, some one-stop shop. Hello, is anybody listening? I don't mean people here. Important people, not that you're not important. We need a portal. All right, we've got just a few seconds left, and this is what everybody here who makes investments has been waiting for. You're going to make a prediction, each of you. And your prediction is going to be at what year EVs reach a 50% share of the light-duty market. Everybody wants to know this question, including me. So,
Clarification?
Globally?
50% sales or 50% VIO?
Excellent question. 50% sales. 50% of the light-duty sales. In what year, right? So Spencer referenced a commitment with and by the Biden administration to be at 50% by 2030. So hint. That's one person's, important person's perspective. So I'm going to start with Isaac, and we're going to go to Isaac's left. What year?
Ooh, admittedly, I'm on the bearish side of this because I think there's a lot of complex issues that have to be solved. But I do think it's going to be sometime in the 2035 to 2040 timeframe. Got it.
Okay, Spencer.
Well, I'm not going to predict, but I'm going to say we're going to be 3/5 of the way there in 2 years. And by 2025, Audi will sell 30% of its portfolio will be electric vehicle sales. So we've committed to that. We've committed to the Biden administration, so we'll stand behind that 2030 commitment. Otherwise, a lot of things got to come together to accelerate this.
Jonathan.
There's demand in 2030. Will there be supply? And so I think the question is, are we going to be 2030, 2031, 2032, 2033? And again, distributionally, you'll see it in Washington, California, New York, New Jersey first.
Got it. Okay, Rachel, last word to you.
Difference between the US market and a global market. From a global market, I think 50% by 2030 is what Ford's committed to. We certainly, again, stand by the Biden administration's goal for all of their federal fleets by 2030. But to determine what's going to happen in the US, there are way too many unanswered questions to be able to put a date on it.
Well, we're going to leave it there. Help me thank the panelists for a great conversation.